I think the companies that continue to invest in early career and keep those pipelines alive and those faucets on are going to be positioned to win in the future versus those that cut the faucet or change the faucet and replace some of those early jobs with AI. I think they'll be in a more difficult position later on down the road.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I am super excited to be here today with Corey Twitty. He is a recruiting strategist who's helped some of the world's most influential companies, including Netflix, Lyft, Intuit, and Target, build talent programs and scale with their business. At Netflix, which is what we're going to get to today, he built the company's first emerging talent program, really defining how the company attracts and develops future leaders, which is super important. And throughout his career, Corey has focused on designing forward-thinking recruiting strategies that blend creativity, data, and long-term vision to shape the future of how great teams are built. So couldn't think of a better person to have on here today.
Thanks, Shannon. I really appreciate it. I've been following for a long time now, so it's great to be on the other side of the mic now.
Amazing. Well, I am very excited to get into the big shift that you were able to bring to Netflix, especially changing the culture around bringing in emerging talent. But just to set the context and the stage a little bit, I would love to hear from your perspective with all of your experience. Why does early career hiring matter so much, especially now?
Yeah, no, Shannon, I think it's a great question. And the more I've really reflected on this, the more I realize how central it is now. I think for early talent, it's so critical that companies are bringing in new ideas, new perspectives. I think especially with the backdrop of AI, this next group of talent are going to be people who are familiar with this. And so as we think about bringing in new perspectives, new ideas, it's important for companies to stay fresh in their thinking. And so what I found with early talent is they challenge the status quo, right? They're always the ones asking the tough questions and the why. And this is really a way to keep your company fresh and thinking innovatively.
I love that. And I think there's also a really interesting play here on succession planning. Like you can't wait until a role is vacant to prepare. So I'm sure you've experienced this as something that has been helpful for not only this moment in time, but also years to come as companies grow this emerging talent throughout their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a succession planning perspective, that's really one of the biggest plays with early talent is really creating your future leadership bench, right? And I think as this competition for talent continues to get more and more competitive, you have a real opportunity to build your brand over a significant period of time. And when you look at Gen Z as a demographic, there's serious opportunities to not only blend your employer brand, but also your consumer brand. And so there's so many opportunities to get in front of this group of talent to make sure that you're building future leaders, right? And I think that that's been the mentality or the mindset that I've carried with building programs was, this is not just hiring a one-off intern or a one-off new grad. It's how do you actually think about building your leadership bench for tomorrow? And it all starts when folks are in college or even in high school for that matter.
Yeah, it's definitely a really important long-term strategy. And I'm super excited to get into sort of your story at Netflix. I think most people know that for a long time, Netflix was really excited about the sort of senior culture that they had created, and they hired accordingly. And then you sort of stepped in and I think you challenged the status quo and you helped them debunk some of these myths around, early career hiring and why it was needed. Tell me a little bit about the story of being able to shift that senior skewed culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a story it was, actually. I was the person hired to start early talent, but instead of coming in and jumping in, I think that it was so critical to just understand why, understand how Netflix has been so successful only hiring senior talent, right? I think it was a bit of an enigma in an industry for a while. But obviously something was working. And so it was really before pushing any sort of strategy or perspective, it was about understanding why. Netflix culture really valued autonomy, mastery, right? And I think that there was this perception that early talent would be a slowdown. And my role was to really reposition that as a strategic advantage. And so what was so critical for me from a mindset perspective was not treating dissent as opposition, but treating it as information and a design input, right? And culture change really happens when people feel ownership of the new story and not just when they're told to believe it. And so much of my time there in the beginning and getting this started was asking why, holding debate, running toward dissent, to incorporate all of these different inputs to figure out how can we co-build this and co-design this together. And so it took bringing advocates and people who were champions, putting them in a room with people who disagreed to then figure out how do we surface the best ideas to really create what a bespoke talent strategy would look like at Netflix. And so I was welcoming the skeptics, and I think that was really critical in this.
I had never really thought about this before, but when you were talking about Netflix was so successful with how they were hiring and the outcomes of the business, I could imagine it was really hard to be like, hey, nothing's technically broken, but like let's rejig this whole thing up, But I think that's a testament to the future thinking. What works today is not always what's going to work tomorrow. And especially the importance of how work is resonating today, it is very multi-generational. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, the importance of this today, because companies who have that representation of all different, varieties and levels and factors are probably going to be more successful because people see themselves represented in the brand, and they're represented in the brand because of the perspective that every layer of that representation brings.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about that a lot internally, right? Which was, you really need new and different and additive perspectives, right? I think when you invest in early career and emerging talent, they almost become your cultural R&D, right? And really create that a culture of curiosity, right? And that sparks new ideas. And there's this. I'm gonna blank on who the famous Japanese philosopher is, but there's something about a beginner's mindset and being able to look at things from a fresh perspective every time. And so that was what carried a lot of the early days of getting this program off the ground.
Definitely. I would love to hear, if we're thinking really tactically, if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, you've sold me, I'm invested, we need to invest in early career talent program. A lot of people are going to be building this from scratch. If you were to start this again, how would you do that? What are the things people need to get to have a successful program launch for early career?
Yeah. The first thing is you need a great team. You need a really great team around you if you're in the opportunity to build. I think one of the biggest sort of opportunities that I was granted at Netflix was to build a team. And so I was able to find folks who really challenged and pushed me every single day, right? And I think it's so critical to bring in and find additive perspectives, right? Find people who think differently from you that complement your skill sets, because you can't really scale much without a team and great people around you. And so I think one of the things that I was most grateful for at Netflix was being able to do this work with really great people. But that aside, one of the things that's critical is really sitting close with your stakeholders. I come from a design thinking background, and one of the first elements of design thinking is building deep customer empathy. So sitting, whether it's with engineering or go to market, whoever that is, you have to really build close empathy with your key stakeholders. And so finding out what are those unique challenges that the business is having, right? At Netflix, some of the challenges were making sure that we had the right skills and expertise to the problem at hand, right? So that required a new level of work and a new level of employee, as one example. But it's going to be different, whatever organization you're at. And so sitting with the business and tying it to a real talent strategy, I think that that's where you'll build a more sustainable and durable program. Not everybody's going to agree with you either, right? And I think that that was another big lesson at Netflix was, yes, I was coming in with over a decade of early talent experience. And when sitting with engineers, many of them challenged and pushed some of my perspectives and thoughts. And at first I was a little taken aback, but the more I got familiar and the more I got comfortable in the environment, it really allowed us to co-design and build with the business. And so that's the theme here is when you build empathy, you're able to better co-design. And that was a critical first step in building a durable program.
Yeah, and change is hard. I don't know that anyone from like an innate human perspective can like love change. I feel like as humans, we're like, no change, please. Like, let's keep everything as it is. So pushing that forward, you're not even just challenging other people's boundaries, you're challenging your own boundaries. And there's one thing that stuck out to me when we've chatted before, which is sort of the flexibility as well and the importance of this concept of strong opinions loosely held.
As I sat again close with the business, strong opinions loosely held became a very quick banner and motto for us as a team where, you know, it's important to have conviction on certain things, right? You're being hired to bring your perspective, to share your expertise, but you have to understand as well that your job is to surface the best solutions, right? Sometimes that's your own, sometimes it's not. And so coming in with a strong perspective is a good thing, but also being open to debate and change and pivot along the way. And I think, especially coming from deep emerging talent background and in a place like Netflix, we are creating something new and different from scratch. And the old playbook wasn't going to work. And that's where that's where the magic comes, is when you're able to put people who agree, people who disagree, and surface the best solution. So in addition to strong opinions loosely held, the next level of that for me as a leader and why I was hired at Netflix was being sure of your purpose, but flexible in your path, standing firm in the conviction and having belief before you really got the results, but showing up with grit, perseverance, because it's not always up and to the right? There's lots of ups and downs. And I think that that was one of the most grounding pieces and evolutions of strong opinions loosely held was the fact that I needed to be really strong and firm in my purpose, but flexible in the path and how we get there. And that took a lot of partnership with the engineering team, with my individual team that I'm really grateful for pushing me in new directions that I didn't even think about.
With talent in the state it is today, and with resources being maybe a little bit lower than they have been historically, how would someone go to their leadership team to advocate for resources for a program like this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to understand what business problem you're trying to solve, right? If this is a vanity or side project, you're not going to get resources for it. And so aligning with leaders to understand what they're trying to solve and truly, how does this make your organization better? How does this improve the existing landscape today to reduce friction, right? And the more you're able to uncover that, the more you're able to actually build something that people want to put resources behind it, right? I think the critical piece here was not pushing this as a TA initiative or a talent acquisition initiative, but actually with the business, right? And so we were able to get resources not only aligned from a talent perspective, because it was actually helping us holistically make hires across the board, but also it was solving a true business need tied to real business impact. And so that was, I think, the use case here is trying to figure out how do you tie it to a real business problem and real solution to get those resources. But there's a whole host of things you can do to scrappily stand this up, and you'd be surprised what you can get done when you build that partnership with the business, right? And if you're not able to build a team internally, how do you empower the business to help drive that forward? Whether that's with interviewing, whether that's with resume reviews, all of those different things, you find that people generally want to help. And my biggest aha moment was, how do you make emerging talent, or how do you tie emerging talent with not only a business problem, but also the intrinsic value behind it? And so we would always talk about, and this is nothing new, this is not my perspective here, but talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. Netflix was a place where you had to almost parachute into the company. And what we were trying to do was to build a road and to build a pathway in. And that intrinsically motivated a lot of my cross-functional partners and stakeholders to play, in the beginning, probably a larger role than they needed to. And so business problem, intrinsic motivation, and then realizing that you can't do it alone, and the importance of delegating and bringing partners along the way to help you scale something.
Totally. I think it's a good point to emphasize that having a team doesn't necessarily mean having a talent team. It means having a group of people who is willing to put in time and effort, whether that be you, a head of talent, or a talent person, a hiring manager who's really enthusiastic about the program and is willing to pave the way for other folks. This is maybe a hot take question, but if you had to pick between starting an intern program or a new grad program, like, where should people start?
Ooh, it's Shannon. It's a great question, because that was exactly, I don't want to call it a conundrum, but that was exactly the position that I was in to start the program at Netflix. And I think that there's pros and cons, right? And so maybe I'm skirting your hot take question a little bit, but if I had to say, it really depends on the maturation of your org. So I'm going to give a more nuanced answer, is what I'm going to do. So
classic. It depends.
It depends, right? So, if you start with an intern program, and this was kind of the strategy of Netflix, it was like, let's hire some interns and hire really phenomenal, high quality interns. And then let's let the culture of freedom and responsibility take over. And so hiring managers would then find ways to convert their interns to new grads, because the ultimate goal is to bring in and hire full-time employees at the new grad and early career level. So if I'm going to be direct, I would say new grad is most important. But if your organization isn't ready to make the investment in new grads, or you don't have the infrastructure yet, interns offer a really great bridge to figure out your organizational structure. Do you have the right infrastructure? Do you have the right onboarding? And then do you have managers that can really develop early talent, right? Because manager capabilities is a critical dependency that each organization has to ask themselves if they're going to invest in this type of talent.
I could definitely see where interns would be a kind of good practice ground, because in a way you're not committing to having someone for a career yet. You are testing it out, and you're seeing, can the organization be the mentors that we need for interns and early career folks to have and maintain the quality of output that we expect and merge in with the values.
And I would say maybe practice ground is not necessarily the right verbiage, but more so low stakes, right?
Yeah.
Or lower stakes.
Lower
right?
stakes,
and
yeah.
I think because internships matter, that experience is so critical if you're going to position your brand to win and to convert. And so you actually really do need to nail that internship experience, but it is more low stakes than, hey, this is my first job out of school, and this is our first time hiring new grads. Like, you need to make sure that you have the right infrastructure and support systems in place to make sure that they're set up for success.
Yeah. First roles out of school or training, or even like straight out of high school, some folks are doing now, it's super impactful on the rest of your career, for better or for worse. So it definitely is really important. And I think that you had alluded to a little bit earlier about kind of some results for this program. Tell me a little bit about, once things were set up, what did you see change?
it was a journey, right? And I think the most important part was knowing that it wasn't going to be perfect from the beginning, but really creating this feedback loop to and continually increase every day. My team and I would always talk about marginal gains and how do you make it 1% better every single day and create an environment where you can really receive that feedback. And so where we started was definitely not where we ended. But, we started to see culture shift. We went from this environment within engineering that only hires the most senior people from around the world to being more open and amenable to entry level and junior talent. And I think what really came from that is that many of these folks punch far above their weight, right? And that they can really contribute in a meaningful and impactful way and dispel the myth that you don't have to be senior to be successful in a place like Netflix. And I think with the backdrop of AI, I think these students in this next crop and next generation are going to continue to make outsized impact with the use of AI in the backdrop. I think the companies that continue to invest in early career and keep those pipelines alive and those faucets on are going to be positioned to win in the future versus those that cut the faucet or change the faucet and replace some of those early jobs with AI. I think they'll be in a more difficult position later on down the road.
For sure. And we all know that the talent market ebbs and flows between employer market and candidate market. If you're consistent, you're just going to be so much better off. And I'll just say kudos for all the work that you did on this, because I actually think it was influential to talent at large, because a lot of people saw, okay, Netflix was able to completely shift their culture of how they hired and who they hired into something that helped their business for the better. Let's look at that and say, as a case study, to say, listen, like, we know it's going to be hard, but it is possible to make those changes.
Yeah. And I think it's, how do you, again, continually tie it back to a business outcome and what success metrics do you tie to that? And on Netflix, it was a very simple 3-part strategy, which was build, maximize, complement, right? It's how do you balance how you buy and build talent to grow a sustainable organization over time. The next piece of that, which we talked a little bit earlier on, was maximize. How do we look at and right size the scope and complexity of the problem at hand to the years of experience and talent you have within the organization? There was, when I was doing focus groups and chatting with engineers, I chatted with one engineer that said to me, I'm making the most money I've ever made in my career, yet I'm doing the most junior work I've ever done. And that illuminated a challenge to say, how do we actually decouple and look truly at the job architecture and org design that we had, right? And so that was changing a larger infrastructure need. And then the last point was complement, right? How do we bring in new talent to complement our existing workforce, right? How do we take some of the best engineers that we have who are incredibly senior and pairing them up with folks coming right out of university? And I think magic happens and a lot of new ideas and new perspective came from that. And over the time that I was there, we scaled early talent from under 1% of the organization to upward of almost 11, 12% of the organization.
That's a huge shift, especially in a couple of years. So kudos again. I would love to hear, just sort of as a last bit, you've learned some lessons that for early career that you might be able to take into your new role, which also has a focus on exec hiring. What sort of parallels do you see and how are you going to take that mindset into your new work?
Yeah. I think one of the first things is at Netflix, there's a strong perspective and narrative around talent density and making sure you're truly hiring the best and you're holding an incredibly high bar and every single person that you're bringing in. And so from an executive perspective, it's absolutely critical to make sure that we're getting the right inputs to ensure that we're hiring truly the best leaders that can help take Zillow into this sort of next chapter of where we want to go as an organization and as a company. And then I think the secret sauce for a lot of organizations is the talent intelligence and the market mapping behind the scenes. And so figuring out who are the top 50, 100 new grads out there, how do we build a leaderboard and how do we build sort of a list of who those individuals are? Very similar to what we want to do in the exec space, right? Who are those luminaries in the space? What are the market trends and the intelligence that we're leveraging to help inform where we go to get talent, right? I think we've seen this massive shift where in recruiting, where it used to be hard to find people, now it's not hard to find people. It's how do you get the right people and how do you make sure that you're bringing quality in, right? And so I think as we start to build and nurture relationships over time, right? That's a huge bit in early career is early ID and figuring out how you nurture people over a long period of time. And very similar with exec, right? You're nurturing, you're building relationships over a long period of time to align when that right role, comes available. And so I think that those are some things that we can do to translate, and as well as carrying a programmatic approach, right? And early career is very programmatic, and there's opportunities in the exec space to figure out how do you cultivate, nurture, and put structure into this strategy around identifying, nurturing, and ultimately getting them in positions and opportunities at the organization.
I love that. And it's amazing to have someone so thoughtfully bringing their past experience to their future experience. Well, we are going to get to some of our questions we like to ask every guest. It's in the extended version on our YouTube. So if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can head to YouTube to watch the extended version to hear about Corey's hiring excellence, what hiring excellence means to him, his recruiting hot take, and one thing he would tell his earlier career self. Without further ado, at Ashby, we talk a lot about hiring excellence, and we're really trying to move hiring excellence forward, like through our product and through community. I would love to hear, when you hear hiring excellence, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked this in the sense of I had like a prepared answer for like what I thought, and I thought a lot about this. But in this moment, the word that comes to mind for me is actually frictionless. And at Netflix, one of the biggest learnings and takeaway was this sort of cultural philosophy of people over process. And when you hire really exceptional people, you can exercise and lean into judgment to get really great outcomes. And within the recruiting and the hiring process, again, hiring process, there's a lot of process, right? And I think the benefits of it is, consistency and equity and consistent outcomes. That said, I think there are moments in the process where it creates a lot of friction, right? And so I think hiring excellence is balancing creating a consistent and structured process with reducing friction to move fast and truly hire the best out there.
Period. Love it. I know that you gave a hot take, but I'm going to ask you for another one. My favorite question. What is your recruiting hot take? Your number one recruiting hot take that you can say on a podcast?
That you could say on a podcast. So in addition to the early career one, right, I think I'll always be passionate about the space. And, I think it's really critical that companies continue to invest and figure out how do they shift and redefine the work to ensure that they're keeping that pipeline on, right? So look, it's going to look different in the future. It already looks different, right? But to simply reduce all of your early career hiring and replace it with AI is I don't believe that that's a winning strategy, because at the end of the day, these folks are going to be your future leaders. And even from a cost perspective, right? Like you might end up paying significantly more for them later on versus the opportunity to really build and grow them into the values and the culture that you want to bring in. So that would be the early career hot take. I think the other hot take is really, I think recruiting will start to evolve on the other side of the fence and look more like executive and leadership recruiting. When you think about all of the tools within AI and the massive amounts of applications that you're getting, recruiters and teams are going to have to leverage intelligence, market mapping, succession planning to really uncover and cut through the noise on who are those candidates that we actually really want to bring in, right? Who is real? Who is not real, right? How do you nurture those relationships? How do you know that you're talking to a real person on the other side of it? And I think a lot of those practices and what I'm seeing in exec are going to translate more broadly to figure out moves, to figure out the market mapping, talent intelligence, to uncover who those right fits for those roles are.
100% heavy on cutting out the noise. I think the problem of the future is probably, is this person who they say they are, and can they do the thing that we think that they can do? And it sounds so simple when boiled down, but the amount of process and operational excellence that goes into getting that to be a yes is actually quite difficult. So I'm curious to see how that evolves. But I know we've talked a little bit about your career throughout, and funnily, we've been talking a lot about early career. I would love to know, what is one thing you tell your earlier career self?
Listen better. Be a more effective listener. I think early in my career, I probably did a lot more talking than listening. And I think that probably, I don't want to say prevented, but I think I could have continued to have even more outsized impact, if you will. So I think it's so important to listen well, develop that skill. I think it's a lifelong skill to really hear folks react and process. So I would tell my early career self to listen more.
As a fellow passionate person, I agree. And I think a lot of passionate people they have so much going on up there, and they're like, I got to get like everything out, and I got to get it out now. And you're so excited, but like, don't let being excitable and passionate hinder your ability to be an active listener for that outsized impact, like you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you framed exactly what I was saying and feeling as an early career person. I think I have a lot of passion, and I'm very excited about this work. And so I think take a beat and try to uncover the true problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. Passionate people, listen up. Literally listen up.
Literally listen up.
Amazing. Well, we are coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and your work?
You can find me on LinkedIn, actively post there. So yeah, find me there. I tend to travel and be at conferences and all those types of things as well. So if you see me out, definitely introduce yourself, and looking forward to meeting whoever out there comes to say hello.
Amazing. I'm sure we'll see you on the conference circuit in no time. But
yeah, absolutely.
I cannot thank you enough for joining us on Offer Accepted. I think just not only from an early career perspective, but just the thought process behind building programs from scratch is going to be super helpful for our listeners. So I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks, Shannon. Glad I was able to be on the episode.
This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. A scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.